The fluorescent lights in Boston General's ER had been flickering for 3 hours, and nobody had time to call maintenance. Tuesday night shift, which meant the usual chaos: drunk college students from BU with alcohol poisoning, elderly patients with chest pain, and the endless parade of people who treated the emergency room like their primary care physician because they couldn't afford anything else. I understood that last group intimately. Before nursing school, I'd been one of them. My feet ached in the sensible shoes I'd bought on clearance 6 months ago, the soles wearing thin, but still good enough that I couldn't justify replacing them. Not with student loan payments due in 8 days, and my bank account hovering dangerously close to overdraft territory. $347,000. That's what my nursing degree had cost after interest compounded on the loans I'd needed to survive 4 years of school while working every shift I could find. Sometimes I did, the math in my head during quiet moments. How many shifts until I'd paid off even a fraction of it? The answer was always depressing. Bed 7 needs vitals, Sarah called from the nurse's station. She was the charge nurse tonight, which meant organized chaos instead of complete disaster. And we've got incoming 4-year-old male, difficulty breathing, fever, possible seizure activity. I grabbed a fresh set of gloves and headed for bed 7, where an elderly man with pneumonia symptoms waited with patient resignation. His insurance card was worn from use, the edges soft. Medicaid. He probably delayed coming in until he couldn't breathe anymore because, even with coverage, the copay might mean choosing between medication and groceries. If you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. I love hearing from you. Let's get you feeling better, Mr. Chen, I said, gently wrapping the blood pressure cuff around his thin arm. His wife sat beside the bed, holding his hand, her grip tight with worry that transcended language barriers. They spoke to each other in Mandarin, soft words of comfort that needed no translation. The ambulance bay doors crashed open with the particular urgency that meant serious incoming. I finished documenting Mr. Chen's vitals and hurried toward the commotion, my body moving on autopilot after 5 years of ER nursing. What I saw stopped me mid-stride. A man strode through the doors carrying a small boy in his arms with the kind of desperate determination that made my chest constrict. But it wasn't just any desperate father. This man moved like violence barely contained, like a predator forced into unfamiliar territory. His suit probably cost more than I made in 3 months, charcoal gray, perfectly tailored, now rumpled from holding his son. Dark hair fell across his forehead, and even in crisis, he carried himself with an authority that made people instinctively step back. But it was his eyes that caught me. Dark brown, almost black, and filled with a terror so raw it made my professional mask slip for just a moment. Behind him came 2 men in equally expensive suits, their attention constantly scanning the ER with the kind of awareness that screamed private security. Or something more dangerous. "He can't breathe right," the man said, his accent wrapping around the words. "Italian? Definitely Italian. His fever is high. He had shaking earlier, like a seizure. You have to help him now." Sarah appeared at my elbow, clipboard ready. "Sir, I need you to. Now." The single word carried such absolute command that Sarah actually stepped back. This was a man accustomed to being obeyed immediately and without question. I moved forward, switching into the calm competence that emergencies demanded. "I'm Emma. I'm a nurse here. Let me help your son. What's his name?" Those dark eyes fixed on me with laser intensity, assessing me in a heartbeat. Whatever he saw made something in his expression shift slightly, not softening exactly, but opening just enough to let me in. "Marco. His name is Marco." He adjusted his grip on the boy, who was indeed struggling to breathe, his small chest heaving with effort. 4 years old. Fever started this morning, climbing all day. The shaking happened in the car on the way here. "Okay, good. You did the right thing bringing him in." I guided them toward our pediatric bay, the secured area where we treated children separately from adult patients. How high did the fever get? 104.3 when I checked 20 minutes ago. No hesitation. Precise information delivered with the same authority he'd used to command Sarah. Behind us, the 2 security men tried to follow. Sarah intercepted them smoothly, despite her earlier flustered response. "Gentlemen, only parents in the treatment area. Hospital policy." I glanced back, saw the man give his security a single sharp nod. They stopped immediately, taking up positions flanking the entrance like sentries. Whatever this family's situation, it involved the kind of resources that came with armed guards. None of my business. Right now, I had a sick child who needed help. Set him here on the bed, I directed, pulling the curtain for privacy. The pediatric bay had cheerful murals on the walls, cartoon animals, and bright colors meant to comfort frightened children. Marco's father placed him on the bed with infinite care, his large hands gentle despite their obvious strength. Up close, I could see Marco clearly. Dark curls plastered to his forehead with sweat, cheeks flushed with fever, his breathing rapid and shallow. But what struck me most was his eyes when they briefly opened the same dark brown as his father's, but filled with a fear that went beyond physical illness. This was a child who'd been scared for a long time. Marco, sweetheart, I'm going to help you feel better. I kept my voice soft, measured, as I reached for my stethoscope. Your daddy's right here. You're safe. The boy's gaze darted to his father, seeking confirmation. The man moved immediately to the head of the bed, his hand stroking Marco's hair with practiced tenderness. She's going to help you, Piccolo. Be brave for me. I placed the stethoscope on Marco's chest, listening to his lungs, wheezing, definitely, and the rapid heartbeat of a body fighting hard against infection. His temperature registered at 104.6 on our digital thermometer, dangerously high. Has he been sick recently? Any cold symptoms before today? I asked while examining Marco's throat, which showed the telltale redness of infection. Nothing. He was fine yesterday. This morning he woke up crying, saying his throat hurt and his chest felt tight. The man's jaw clenched. I should have brought him in immediately. I thought it was just a cold. I gave him medicine, watched him. But then the fever wouldn't break, and the shaking started. You brought him when you needed to. I interrupted gently, seeing the guilt consuming him. Febrile seizures can happen suddenly with high fevers in young children. You're here now, and we'll take care of him. Dr. Reeves appeared, our attending physician for the night. I gave him a quick rundown of symptoms while continuing my assessment. Marco's oxygen saturation was low 89% when it should be above 95. His breathing had become more labored in just the few minutes since arrival. Respiratory infection, possibly RSV or influenza complicated by fever, Dr. Reeves said after his own examination. Let's get him on oxygen, start IV fluids, and I want a full respiratory panel. Also draw blood for CBC and cultures. Marco whimpered at the word blood, his small body tensing. His father immediately leaned closer, murmuring in Italian soft, soothing words that seemed to calm the boy slightly. I'll be as gentle as possible, I promised, prepping the IV kit. This was always the hardest part with pediatric patients, the necessary pain of helping them. But when I approached with the needle, Marco's whimper turned into a full cry. Not the angry tantrum of a tired child, this was terror, pure and visceral. His small hands pushed at me weakly, his breathing becoming even more distressed as panic set in. Marco, Piccolo, you have to let her help. His father tried to hold him still, but the boy thrashed harder, his cry escalating into something that made every nurse in the vicinity look over with concern. This wasn't working. The more we restrained him, the worse his breathing became. Panic and illness were feeding off each other in a dangerous spiral. I pulled back, setting down the IV supplies. There had to be another approach. Does he have a comfort item? I asked. Something that helps when he's upset? A toy or blanket? The man's expression flickered with something painful. He used to, his mother's scarf. But he lost it 2 months ago and nothing else works. His mother's scarf. Past tense on the mother. And suddenly Marco's deep-seated fear made more sense. This wasn't just a sick child afraid of needles. This was a traumatized child who'd lost his mother and associated medical settings with loss. What did your wife do when he was scared? The question was invasive but necessary. Did she have a way of calming him? The man's throat worked, swallowing hard. She sang to him, an old Italian lullaby her grandmother taught her, Stella Stellina. His voice cracked slightly on the name. She died 8 months ago. Since then, nothing helps when he gets like this. Nothing works. 8 months. This poor baby had been grieving for 8 months, and now his father was watching him suffer without the one comfort that had always worked. I made a decision that was probably foolish but felt absolutely right. I don't know that specific song, I said softly. But my grandmother, she taught me an Italian lullaby when I was little. She was from Naples. Would it be okay if I tried singing to Marco? Sometimes the melody itself is soothing, even if it's not the exact song he remembers. Hope and skepticism warred in the man's expression. You speak Italian? Not well, but I remember the song phonetically. My grandmother sang it every night when she watched me after my parents died. The admission slipped out before I could stop it, revealing more than I intended. But maybe that vulnerability was what Marco needed, someone who understood loss. The man studied me for a long moment, then nodded once. A sharp, controlled gesture that granted permission. I pulled a stool close to the bed and sat, bringing myself to Marco's eye level. His crying had subsided to hiccuping sobs, his dark eyes watching me with exhausted wariness. "Marco, my name is Emma," I said gently. "I lost my mama and papa when I was young, too. My nonna, my grandmother, she used to sing to me when I was sad or scared. Would you like me to sing your nonna's song?" He didn't respond, just stared at me with those eyes that held too much pain for a 4-year-old. I began to sing. The words came from muscle memory, from childhood nights when grief had felt insurmountable, and my grandmother's voice had been the only thing anchoring me to the world. The melody was soft, lilting, designed for whispered comfort in dark rooms when monsters felt real. "Stella stellina, la notte si avvicina, la fiamma traballa, la mucca è nella stalla." Marco's crying stopped abruptly. His body went rigid, every muscle tensing as if he'd been struck. For a heart-stopping moment, I thought I'd made it worse. Then slowly, incrementally, he relaxed. His breathing eased just slightly. His eyes locked onto mine with an intensity that reminded me of his father's gaze, searching, desperate, hoping. I continued singing, letting the familiar words wrap around us both. Around all three of us, really, because the man had gone completely still, his hand frozen mid-stroke in Marco's hair. "La mucca e il vitello, la pecora e l'agnello, la chioccia coi pulcini, la gatta coi gattini." By the second verse, Marco's hand had reached out, tiny fingers grasping for mine. I took his hand gently, continuing the song while stroking his palm with my thumb. His breathing continued to even out, the panic subsiding as the melody soothed something deep in his traumatized psyche. When I finished the third verse, Marco's eyes were heavy-lidded. His body finally relaxed against the hospital bed. Still sick, still needing treatment, but no longer fighting in blind terror. "May I try the IV now, sweetheart?" I asked softly. "I'll keep holding your hand. Your papa will be right here. And if it helps, I can sing more." Marco looked at his father, seeking permission or reassurance. The man nodded, his expression transformed. The exhaustion remained, but beneath it burned something fierce: recognition, gratitude, and, unless I was imagining it, unshed tears. "Yes, Piccolo. Let Nurse Emma help you. She knows Nonna's songs." This time, when I inserted the IV, Marco whimpered but didn't thrash. I sang quietly the whole time, drawing blood samples, setting up the oxygen cannula, adjusting leads for the heart monitor. His small hand gripped mine with surprising strength, but he stayed still, trusting me in a way he clearly hadn't trusted anyone medical in a very long time. "You're so brave," I whispered when it was done. "Such a brave boy." Dr. Reeves returned to review the setup, nodding his approval. "We'll get these labs processed stat. In the meantime, let's push some Tylenol to bring that fever down and start him on albuterol treatments for the respiratory distress. Emma, can you stay with this patient? He seems most comfortable with you." Of course. It wasn't even a question. I wasn't leaving this child until he was stable. Over the next 2 hours, Marco drifted in and out of restless sleep, while medications worked to bring his fever down and ease his breathing. I stayed close, checking vitals, adjusting his oxygen, and singing softly whenever he grew agitated. His father never left the bedside, one hand always maintaining contact with his son. We existed in our own bubble, this unlikely trio, while the ER chaos continued around us. During one of Marco's deeper sleeps, the man finally spoke to me directly. "How did you know that song?" His voice was low, rough with suppressed emotion. "That exact lullaby? My grandmother was from Naples, like I said. She came to Boston in the 1950s, married my grandfather, raised my father here. After my parents died in a car accident when I was 8, she took me in." I adjusted Marco's blanket unnecessarily, needing something to do with my hands. "She sang that song every single night for 3 years until she passed away. I haven't thought about it in years, but when you mentioned your wife singing Italian lullabies, it's the same song Rachel sang to him." He scrubbed a hand across his face, exhaustion and wonder mixing in his expression. "Stella Stellina. Her grandmother was also from Naples. The odds of you knowing the exact same lullaby are astronomical," I finished. "But sometimes things line up in strange ways." He studied me with that intense gaze again, and I felt oddly exposed, like he could see straight through to the student loan debt, the double shifts, the tiny apartment in Dorchester where I lived alone because roommates were complicated, and I valued silence after the chaos of the ER. "What is your name? Your full name?" "Emma. Emma Rossi." I pronounced it the Italian way automatically, the way my grandmother had taught me. My father was second generation, but he kept the name. "Gabriel Costello." He offered his hand, formal despite the circumstances. His grip was firm, warm, and somehow comforting. "Thank you for helping my son, for knowing what he needed when I couldn't give to him." "You were giving it to him," I said honestly. "You brought him here, stayed with him, loved him through his fear." "That's everything, Mr. Costello." "Gabriel, please." Something shifted in his expression. "You sang my dead wife's lullaby to my son and held his hand through the worst of it. We're past formalities." The lab results came back positive for influenza complicated by a secondary bacterial infection. "Doctor, Reeves prescribed antibiotics and admitted Marco overnight for observation, wanting to ensure the fever stayed down and his breathing remained stable. By 4 a.m, Marco was sleeping peacefully in a pediatric ward bed upstairs, his oxygen levels finally normal, his temperature down to 99.8. Gabriel had never left his side. "My shift ends at 7, I said quietly, checking Marco's chart one final time before handing off to the day shift. "He'll be in good hands with the pediatric nurses upstairs. They're excellent. Will you come back?" Gabriel's question was direct, almost urgent. "Not officially, just to check on him? He responded to you in a way he hasn't responded to anyone since Rachel died. I don't want to lose that connection." I should have said no. Should have explained that professional boundaries existed for good reasons, that my job was done now that Marco was stable and admitted. But when I looked at this man, this father who'd been fighting alone to help his traumatized son heal, I couldn't refuse. "I'll come by during my break tomorrow evening," I heard myself agree, "just to see how he's doing." Relief flooded Gabriel's features. "Thank you, truly." I left Boston General as dawn was breaking, my body exhausted from the 13-hour shift, but my mind restless. Something about tonight felt significant in a way I couldn't quite articulate. Not just helping a sick child, I did that every shift. Something about the way Gabriel had looked at me, the impossible coincidence of knowing his wife's lullaby, the feeling that I'd been exactly where I was supposed to be at exactly the right moment. My grandmother used to say fate moved in mysterious ways, that sometimes the universe put people in each other's paths for reasons that wouldn't become clear until much later. As I rode the bus back to Dorchester, watching the city wake up around me, I wondered what reason the universe might have for putting Gabriel Costello and his son Marco into my life. I had no way of knowing that returning tomorrow would set in motion events that would change everything, that Gabriel was far more than just a worried father, that the men who'd accompanied him to the ER were more than security, and that my decision to sing an old lullaby would mark me as important to a man whose world was built on power and violence and codes I didn't understand. All I knew was that a little boy had needed comfort, and I'd been able to provide it. Sometimes, that's all that mattered. Sometimes, it was everything. The pediatric ward on the 4th floor of Boston General was a different world from the ER. Quieter, more controlled, with murals of underwater scenes and a playroom visible through glass walls. I'd changed out of my scrubs into jeans and a sweater before coming up, wanting to keep this visit casual rather than official. My shift didn't start for another 2 hours, but I'd promised Gabriel I'd check on Marco, and despite every rational voice telling me this was a mistake, I kept my word. Room 412 was at the end of the hallway. Through the partially open door, I could hear low voices speaking Italian, Gabriel's deep tone and another man's, sharper and more clipped. I hesitated, suddenly aware I was intruding on something private. Before I could decide whether to knock or retreat, the door opened. One of the security men from last night stood there, the same one who'd positioned himself by the ER entrance like a sentry. Up close, he was even more intimidating, mid-40s, with a scar, along his jawline and eyes that missed nothing. "Nurse Rossi." He said my name like he'd been expecting me, which meant Gabriel had told him I was coming. "Mr. Costello will be pleased you're here." He stepped aside, and I entered to find Gabriel standing by the window, phone pressed to his ear, speaking rapid Italian that sounded like business rather than pleasantries. Marco was awake in the hospital bed, picking at a breakfast tray with the lackluster interest of a child who felt better but wasn't quite healthy yet. When he saw me, his entire face transformed. "Emma!" My name came out slightly hoarse from his ordeal, but his smile was genuine and bright. "Hi, sweetheart. Look at you sitting up. You're feeling better." I moved to his bedside, automatically checking the monitors even though this wasn't technically my patient anymore. Oxygen saturation at 97%. Temperature normal. Good signs. Gabriel ended his call abruptly, turning to face me with an expression that held too much intensity for a casual check-in visit. "You came." I said I would. I smoothed Marco's hair back from his forehead, pleased to find his skin cool to the touch. "How was his night?" "Good after they moved us up here. He woke twice asking for you." Gabriel moved closer, and I caught the scent of expensive cologne mixed with coffee and exhaustion. He was wearing different clothes, dark slacks, and a navy button-down, but the shadows under his eyes suggested he hadn't slept. "I told him you'd come back. Thank you for not making me a liar." The other man in the room cleared his throat. "Boss, the meeting with—" "Can wait." Gabriel cut him off. "Give us the room, Antonio." Both security men filed out without argument, closing the door behind them. Suddenly the space felt smaller, more intimate, with just the three of us. "Sing?" Marco asked hopefully, holding up his small hands in the universal gesture of a child wanting to be held. "Marco, she's not here to entertain." "You," Gabriel started, but I was already moving closer. "I can sing for a few minutes, if it's okay?" I looked at Gabriel for permission. He's been asking for that song since he woke up. "If you don't mind." I carefully sat on the edge of Marco's bed, letting him lean against my side. He was warm and solid, smelling of hospital soap and the lingering sweetness of childhood. When I began singing Stella Stellina, his body relaxed completely, his breathing evening out into contentment rather than illness. Over his dark curls, my eyes met Gabriel's. The expression on his face made my breath catch something raw and vulnerable that he couldn't quite hide. Gratitude, yes, but also something deeper, something almost like longing. When I finished, Marco was drowsy again, the comfort of familiar melody pulling him toward the healing sleep his body still needed. "He's recovering well," I said softly, easing Marco back against his pillows. "The antibiotics are working. He'll probably be discharged tomorrow if his labs continue improving." "And then what?" Gabriel's question held weight beyond the immediate medical situation. "He goes back to fighting sleep every night, to the nightmares and the terror, to refusing to eat and barely speaking. Has he been like this since your wife passed?" "Worse at first. The first month, he didn't speak at all. Wouldn't eat unless I forced him. Woke screaming every night." Gabriel's voice was hollow with memory. "We've tried everything: pediatric therapists, grief counselors, medications. Some of it helped marginally, but he's still trapped somewhere I can't reach. Until last night," I said carefully, "when he heard the lullaby." "Until you," Gabriel corrected, his dark eyes fixed on mine. "Not just the song, Emma. You. The way you approached him. The gentleness. The fact that you understood his fear because you've lived through similar loss. He connected with you in a way he hasn't connected with anyone since Rachel died. I should have seen it coming, should have recognized the trajectory of this conversation. But somehow I was still surprised when Gabriel said, "I want to hire you." "I have a job," I replied automatically, "here at the hospital. I'll match your salary and double it. You work exclusively with Marco, helping him through his grief and trauma. Live-in position at my home so you're available when the nightmares come." His tone shifted into something more businesslike, controlled. "Full benefits, housing provided, whatever you need to make this work." The offer was staggering. My salary doubled, would eliminate my student loan debt in a fraction of the time. Housing provided meant I could sublet my apartment, save even more. It was practical, generous, almost too good to be true, which meant there had to be a catch. Why me specifically? There are pediatric trauma specialists, grief counselors who are far more qualified than an ER nurse with a dead grandmother who happened to know the same. Lullaby. Because qualifications didn't help my son. Money didn't help him. 6 different specialists didn't help him. Gabriel's voice was rough with frustration. "But you did. In one night, you gave him more peace than he's had in 8 months. That's worth more than any credential." I looked down at Marco, now sleeping peacefully, his small hand curled near his face. This child had crawled into my heart with surprising speed, his pain resonating with my own childhood grief in ways that made professional distance nearly impossible. But something about this situation felt complicated in ways I couldn't quite identify. The security guards who moved like soldiers, the way Gabriel commanded a room, the expensive suits and the obvious wealth that came with resources most people couldn't imagine. "What exactly do you do, Gabriel? What's your business?" His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "I manage family interests, import operations, real estate holdings, various investments." The answer was technically informative while revealing absolutely nothing. A carefully constructed non-answer that set off every instinct I'd developed working in an ER where gang violence and drug trafficking occasionally brought dangerous men through our doors. "That's not a real answer. It's the answer I can give you right now." He moved closer, and I caught that intensity again, the sense of barely controlled power. "Emma, I need help with my son. You can provide that help. The specifics of my business shouldn't matter if you're focused on Marco's well-being. They matter if his environment is contributing to his trauma." Gabriel's expression flickered with something that might have been respect. "Fair point. My work requires security measures that might seem excessive. Marco is aware of guards, of protocols, of the fact that our life is different from other children's, but he's safe, protected, and loved. I can promise you that. Security measures, protocols." The euphemisms were careful, deliberate. I should have walked away, should have recognized this as exactly the kind of complicated situation I'd sworn to avoid after fighting so hard to build a stable, predictable life from the chaos of my childhood. But Marco stirred in his sleep, whimpering slightly, and before I could stop myself, I was smoothing his hair back, humming softly until he settled. The gesture was automatic, maternal in a way that surprised me. "I need to think about it," I heard myself say. "This is a huge decision. I have responsibilities here, patients who depend on me." "Of course." Gabriel reached into his pocket, produced a business card. Heavy cardstock, embossed lettering, just a name and phone number. Nothing else. "Take whatever time you need. But Emma, please consider it seriously. My son needs you. I'm not too proud to admit that I need help giving him what Rachel used to provide." I took the card, feeling the weight of it like a promise or a threat. "I'll call you in a few days with an answer. Thank you for coming today. It meant everything to Marco." He paused, then added more quietly, "To me as well." I left the hospital in a daze, Gabriel's offer spinning through my mind like a roulette wheel that hadn't yet landed. The practical part of me calculated the financial benefits obsessively: debt elimination, savings, security. The cautious part cataloged all the red flags: vague business descriptions, armed security, the sense that Gabriel Costello operated in a world far different from mine. But the part of me that had lost her parents too young, that remembered the desperate grief and the comfort of my grandmother's voice singing away the nightmares, that part couldn't stop thinking about Marco's small hand in mine, and the way he'd finally relaxed when someone understood his pain. I spent my shift in the ER on autopilot, treating patients with my usual competence while my mind churned through possibilities. During my break, I did something I probably shouldn't have. I Googled Gabriel Costello. The results were surprisingly sparse for someone with his obvious wealth. A few society page photos from charity galas, always in an impeccable suit, usually alone or with the same core group of men. One older photo showed him with a beautiful woman, dark hair, warm smile. Rachel, presumably at some kind of hospital fundraiser. No scandal, no criminal record that I could find with basic searches, but also very little real information. It was the kind of online presence someone curated deliberately, showing just enough to appear legitimate while revealing nothing of substance. "You okay?" Sarah asked, finding me in the break room staring at my phone. "You've been distracted all night." "Just thinking about a patient," I said, which was technically true. "The little boy from last night? Marco something?" She poured coffee from the communal pot, grimacing at its burnt taste. "I heard he responded to you amazingly. The pediatric nurses upstairs were talking about it. He just needed someone who understood his grief. Emma, you can't save every traumatized child who comes through these doors." Sarah's voice was gentle but firm. "I know you try, but you'll burn yourself out." "I know." But even as I said it, I knew I was lying. I'd already made my decision, really. Had made it the moment Marco smiled at me, the moment Gabriel's desperation had resonated with my own memories of feeling helpless and alone. If you're hooked on this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything and helps me bring you more emotional stories like this one. 3 days later, I called the number on Gabriel's card. He answered on the second ring. "Emma." Just my name, but I heard relief in it. I'll do it. 3 months. Trial basis. If it's not working for Marco or for me, either party can end the arrangement with 2 weeks' notice. I'd spent those 3 days crafting terms that gave me an exit strategy. And I want everything in writing: salary, housing details, my responsibilities, and clear boundaries about your business, not involving me in any way. Agreed. Can you start next week? I need 2 weeks to give proper notice at the hospital and handle my apartment. I paused, then added, and Gabriel, I'm doing this for Marco. Not for the money, not for you. For that little boy who needs help healing. I know, that's why you're exactly right for this. His voice softened. Thank you, Emma. You won't regret this. I hoped he was right. The exit interview with my ER supervisor was awkward. Helen had been my mentor since I'd started at Boston General, guiding me through the chaos of emergency medicine with patient wisdom. Private nursing for a single patient is a big change from the ER, she said, reviewing my resignation letter with obvious disappointment. Are you sure about this, Emma? I need to try. The salary is significantly better, and honestly, the idea of helping one child intensively instead of cycling through dozens of patients every shift has appeal. All true, even if it wasn't the complete truth. Well, you've been one of our best nurses. If it doesn't work out, we'd be happy to have you back. Helen signed off on my paperwork. Good luck, and be careful. Private positions can sometimes be isolating. Her warning echoed in my mind as I packed up my apartment over the following week. I didn't have much furniture from IKEA, clothes that prioritized function over fashion, kitchen supplies for someone who rarely cooked. Most of it went into storage except for 2 suitcases of essentials. On my last day at the hospital, Sarah threw me an impromptu goodbye party in the break room. Cheap cake from the grocery store, cards signed by the staff, the kind of bittersweet celebration that marked endings. Promise you'll stay in touch, Sarah said, hugging me tight. And if this Gabriel guy turns out to be a creep, you call me immediately, and we'll come extract you. Deal. I laughed, but the concern was touching. The car that picked me up on Sunday morning was precisely the kind of vehicle I'd expected. A black Mercedes with tinted windows, driven by Antonio, the security man from the hospital. He loaded my suitcases with professional efficiency and opened the back door with a formality that made me feel like I was playing dress-up in someone else's life. Mr. Costello is looking forward to your arrival, Miss Rossi, Antonio said as we pulled away from my shabby apartment building in Dorchester. It's just Emma, please. As you wish, miss. We drove north from the city, the neighborhoods gradually shifting from urban density to suburban sprawl to something else entirely. After about 40 minutes, Antonio turned onto a private road, marked only by a discreet gate that swung open automatically. The property beyond made my breath catch. It wasn't quite a mansion, but it was close, a modern architectural masterpiece of glass and stone, set on grounds that seemed to stretch forever. Manicured gardens, a fountain in the circular driveway, the kind of understated elegance that whispered serious wealth. Jesus, I muttered under my breath. Antonio's mouth quirked slightly, the first expression I'd seen from him. Mr. Costello values his privacy and his son's security. The property allows for both. Security. That word again. The front door opened before we reached it. Gabriel stood framed in the entrance. Marco balanced on his hip. The little boy's face lit up when he saw me. Emma. He wiggled to be put down, and Gabriel set him carefully on his feet. Marco ran toward me with the unsteady gait of a 4-year-old who'd recently been sick, throwing himself at my legs with enough force to make me stumble. I crouched down, gathering him into a hug. Hi, sweetheart. Look at you, all better. You came. Papa said you'd come live with us and sing songs. His enthusiasm was infectious, melting some of my nervousness about this arrangement. I did come. I'm excited to spend time with you. Over Marco's head, my eyes met Gabriel's. He looked different here in his own space, more relaxed despite the obvious tension in his shoulders. He wore jeans and a simple white t-shirt that revealed more of his build than the suits had. Muscular in a way that suggested regular, serious training rather than casual gym visits. Welcome, he said simply. Let me show you around. The house was stunning inside high ceilings, an open floor plan, furniture that managed to look both expensive and comfortable. But what struck me most was how lived in it felt despite the obvious wealth. Marco's toys scattered near a leather sofa, children's books stacked on the coffee table, a sippy cup abandoned on the kitchen counter. The main living areas are here on the first floor, Gabriel explained. leading me through rooms that could have been featured in architectural magazines. Kitchen, living room, my office, dining room, entertainment room. Downstairs is a gym, wine cellar, and storage. Gym. That explained the build. Upstairs is the bedroom wing. Marco's room is here. He pushed open a door to reveal a child's paradise. Race car bed, built-in bookshelves, a play area with more toys than I'd owned in my entire childhood. My room is across the hall, and your suite is here. He opened another door, and I stepped into a space larger than my entire Dorchester apartment. A king bed with a plush duvet, sitting area with comfortable chairs, a desk by windows overlooking the gardens, and through another door, a bathroom that looked like it belonged in a luxury spa. "This is too much," I said automatically. "It's what we have available." Rachel designed most of this wing before Marco was born. She wanted guest suites that felt like home. His voice tightened slightly on his wife's name. "Make it yours. Unpack. Settle in. There's no rush. What about my actual responsibilities? You hired me to help Marco, but what does that look like day to day? Whatever he needs. Structure, companionship, help processing his grief. You're not a maid or a nanny in the traditional sense. You're—" He paused, searching for words. "You're the person who understands what he's going through and can help him navigate it." That's incredibly vague. I know. I don't have a manual for this, Emma. I'm making it up as I go. The admission was surprisingly vulnerable. Rachel was the planner, the organizer. She had systems for everything. I'm just trying to keep our son from drowning in grief while managing everything else. Everything else. His mysterious business that required armed security and private estates. "Okay," I said, because what else could I say? "Let me unpack, and then maybe we can talk about establishing a routine for Marco." Structure helps with childhood trauma. Relief crossed Gabriel's features. "Yes, good. Take your time. Dinner is at 6 if you want to join us, but no pressure." He left, taking Marco with him despite the boys' protests about wanting to stay with me. I closed the door to my new suite and sat on the edge of the bed, trying to process what I'd just agreed to. This wasn't a normal nursing position. It wasn't even a normal live-in childcare situation. This was something else, something I couldn't quite define, in a world I didn't understand with a man who kept secrets behind careful smiles. But when I looked out the window at the gardens below, watching Gabriel and Marco walk hand in hand along a stone path, I felt the rightness of this decision settle into my bones. Whatever complications came with this choice, helping that little boy heal was worth navigating them. I just hoped I wasn't walking into something far more dangerous than I could handle. The first week at Gabriel's estate passed in a strange blend of domestic routine and underlying tension I couldn't quite identify. Morning started with Marco, waking around 7, padding down the hallway to my room before going to his father's. He'd knock softly, wait for my invitation, then climb into my bed for what became our morning ritual. I'd sing Stella Stellina while he woke up slowly, peacefully, in a way Gabriel told me he hadn't done since his mother died. He used to wake up screaming, Gabriel confided one morning over coffee while Marco played in the living room. We'd developed a habit of these brief check-ins, coordinating our approaches to Marco's care. Every single morning for months. Nightmares about Rachel, about being alone. Then you arrived and suddenly he's waking up calm, happy even. "It's the routine as much as the song," I explained, though I wasn't entirely sure that was true. Children need predictability, especially when their world has been shattered. Knowing I'm there, that the song will happen, that mornings are safe, it gives him something to hold on to. Whatever the reason, thank you. Gabriel's dark eyes held that intensity again, the look that made me feel like he was seeing past all my carefully constructed boundaries straight into the mess underneath. I focused on my coffee, needing to break that gaze. "How's the transition to solid foods going?" "He's still pretty selective about what he'll eat." "Better. He ate actual scrambled eggs yesterday instead of just pushing them around his plate." Gabriel smiled, and the expression transformed his face from severe to almost boyish. Small victories. Days fell into patterns. I spent mornings with Marco reading, playing, going for walks around the extensive property, with Antonio trailing at a discreet distance. The security presence had become less jarring over the week, though I still noticed details that didn't quite fit normal wealthy family life. The way the guards communicated with subtle hand signals, the cameras hidden in decorative light fixtures. The fact that the property had multiple layers of security that went far beyond. Standard home protection. Afternoons, Gabriel often joined us. He worked from home more than he apparently had before my arrival, his office door frequently open, his presence a constant anchor for Marco. I watched them together, the gentle way Gabriel corrected Marco's grip on a crayon, the patience he showed reading the same book 5 times in a row, the fierce protectiveness that radiated from him whenever his son was near. This was a man who loved his child with devastating intensity. Whatever else he might be, whatever his mysterious business entailed, that love was absolutely genuine. Evenings were family dinners cooked by someone named Teresa, who appeared at 5 each day, prepared elaborate meals, and disappeared before we ate. Gabriel insisted I join them rather than eating separately, creating a strange domesticity, the 3 of us at a table that could seat 12, talking about Marco's day, his developmental progress, small victories and setbacks. It almost felt normal, almost felt like a family. That should have been my first warning that I was getting too comfortable, too invested, crossing professional boundaries into something more personal. The warning I ignored. On the 8th night, Marco had his first nightmare since my arrival. I woke to his screaming around 2 in the morning, my body responding before my mind fully processed the sound. I was out of bed and down the hall in seconds. Muscle memory from childhood, when my own nightmares had sent me running to my grandmother. Gabriel was already in Marco's room, sitting on the race car bed with his son in his lap, murmuring in Italian while Marco sobbed against his chest. The boy's small body shook with terror, completely lost in whatever horror his sleeping mind had conjured. "Mama," Marco cried, the word broken with grief. "Want Mama." "I know, Piccolo. I know." Gabriel's voice was rough, his own pain bleeding through. "Papa's here. You're safe." I hesitated in the doorway, unsure if I should intrude on this private moment. But then Marco's tear-filled eyes found me, and he reached out with both hands. "Emma. Want Emma. Sing." "Come," Gabriel said immediately, and I crossed to them without thinking. I sat beside them on the small bed, and Marco practically lunged from his father's arms into mine, his grip desperate. Hot tears soaked through my sleep shirt, his breathing hitched and panicked. "Shh, sweetheart. You're safe. Just a bad dream." I rocked him gently, starting the lullaby almost automatically. "Stella Stellina, la notte si avvicina." Slowly, incrementally, his sobs quieted, his grip loosened slightly. Gabriel stayed close, one hand on Marco's back, connecting us all in a chain of comfort. By the time I finished the 2nd verse, Marco had exhausted himself into that heavy sleep that follows intense crying. I continued holding him, afraid moving would wake him again. "I should take him," Gabriel whispered. "Put him back in his own bed. Let me stay for a bit. Make sure he's really settled." The suggestion was impulsive, probably inappropriate, but felt absolutely necessary. Gabriel studied me for a moment, then nodded. "I'll be across the hall if you need anything." He left, and I was alone with Marco in the darkness of his room, surrounded by toys and books, and the remnants of a childhood interrupted by grief. I held this child who wasn't mine, in a house that wasn't mine, employed by a man I barely knew, and felt something shift in my chest. This wasn't just a job anymore. Maybe it never had been. I was falling in love with this little boy, investing emotionally in a way that would make leaving when the 3 months ended devastatingly painful. And I was starting to realize that Gabriel knew exactly what he was doing when he'd hired me. He'd seen my grief, my vulnerability, my inability to walk away from a suffering child, and he'd used it, not maliciously, necessarily, but strategically. The thought should have made me angry. Instead, I just felt tired and confused and strangely content holding Marco while he slept. I must have dozed off, because the next thing I knew, gray dawn light was filtering through the curtains, and Gabriel was standing in the doorway watching us. Marco still slept in my arms, my back screaming from the awkward position, my neck stiff from leaning against the wall. "You stayed all night," Gabriel said softly. He needed me to. I tried to shift without waking Marco, wincing as muscles protested. Gabriel moved closer, carefully lifting Marco from my arms. The boy stirred but didn't wake, settling against his father's chest with the unconscious trust of a well-loved child. Once Marco was back in his bed properly, Gabriel turned to me. "Come on, you need breakfast, and probably painkillers for your back." I followed him downstairs, acutely aware I was still in my sleep. Clothes oversized t-shirt and shorts. No bra, my hair a disaster. Gabriel was also in sleepwear, gray sweatpants and a black t-shirt that revealed more of his muscular build than I needed to see at dawn. He moved around the kitchen with practiced efficiency, starting coffee, pulling eggs from the refrigerator. Scrambled, okay? You don't have to cook for me. You spent all night taking care of my son. I can make you breakfast. He cracked eggs into a bowl, movements sure and competent. Besides, Teresa doesn't come until later, and I'm starving. We worked in companionable silence, him cooking, me setting the table, pouring coffee. It felt domestic, intimate in a way that made me hyper-aware of our situation. 2 people in sleepwear, in a quiet kitchen, while a child slept upstairs. Almost like a real family. Almost like something neither of us could actually have. The nightmares were constant before, Gabriel said suddenly, sliding scrambled eggs onto plates. Every night, sometimes multiple times. Rachel's death broke something in him that I couldn't fix. Then they stopped after you arrived, and I thought maybe we'd finally moved past it. Grief doesn't work linearly. He'll have setbacks, especially around milestones or triggers we don't anticipate. I took a bite of eggs, perfectly cooked, seasoned just right. But the fact that he asked for comfort instead of being lost in the fear, that's actually progress. He asked for you specifically. Not me, not his father. You. I caught something in his tone, not quite jealousy, but something close. Hurt, maybe. That his son sought someone else for comfort. Gabriel, he loves you absolutely. You're his world, his anchor. But sometimes trauma associates certain types of comfort with certain people. I happened to be the one who calmed him when he was sick and terrified. My presence became linked with feeling safe. I set down my fork. That doesn't diminish your importance to him. It just means he has 2 people now instead of 1. That's good. That's healthy. He looked at me across the table, and something shifted in his expression. You're good at this. At understanding his needs. At explaining things in ways that make sense. I made the right choice bringing you here. For Marco, yes. I needed to maintain some professional distance before I got lost completely in this situation. That's what matters. Right. For Marco. But the way he said it suggested he was thinking about more than just his son. We finished breakfast, and I excused myself to shower and dress properly. Standing under hot water, I tried to sort through the tangled emotions of the past 8 days. I cared about Marco deeply, dangerously. That was clear. But I was also starting to care about Gabriel in ways that had nothing to do with my job. The way his face softened when he looked at his son, his patience, his obvious devotion, the glimpses of vulnerability beneath the controlled exterior, the way he looked at me sometimes, like I was solving problems he'd thought were unsolvable. That path led nowhere good. He was my employer, still grieving his wife, operating in a world I didn't understand with secrets he hadn't shared. Getting emotionally involved beyond caring for Marco would be a catastrophic mistake. I just wasn't sure I could stop myself. The shift happened on day 15, though I didn't recognize it as a turning point until much later. Marco and I were in the garden, the late September afternoon warm enough that we'd spread a blanket under an old oak tree. He was drawing with crayons, tongue poking out in concentration as he worked on what he claimed was a picture of the 3 of us. Him, me, and his papa. The figures were mostly stick people with disproportionate heads, but my heart still clenched at being included in his family portrait. Emma? His small voice was hesitant. Can I ask something? Of course, sweetheart. You can ask me anything. Are you going to leave like Mama did? The crayon in my hand I'd been coloring my own terrible drawing froze mid-stroke. This was the question I'd been dreading, the one I didn't have a good answer for. Your mama didn't want to leave you, Marco. She died, which is different. She would have stayed forever if she could have. I set down the crayon, giving him my full attention. I'm here to help you for a while, and when that time is done, we'll talk about what comes next. But I promise I won't disappear without saying goodbye, okay? Promise? His dark eyes, so much like Gabriel's, were wide and serious. I promise. Even as I said it, I felt the weight of the commitment. How could I leave this child in 3 months? How could I walk away from someone who'd wrapped himself so thoroughly around my heart? Marco, Gabriel's voice called from the house, tinged with urgency. Emma, inside, now. The tone sent alarm bells ringing. I scooped up Marco and ran toward the house, leaving our supplies scattered on the blanket. Antonio met us at the door, his expression grim. Situation? I asked, my ER training kicking in automatically. Security concern. Need everyone inside until it's resolved. He ushered us through, already speaking into his radio in that clipped tone that meant something serious. Gabriel appeared from his office, phone pressed to his ear, his face set in hard lines I hadn't seen before. When he saw us, relief flickered briefly before the mask slammed back down. "Take them to the safe room," he told Antonio. "Now." "Safe room," I repeated. "Gabriel, what's happening?" "Not now. Go with Antonio. I'll explain when this is handled." His attention was already back on his phone call, switching to rapid Italian that sounded like orders being given. Antonio led us through the house to a section I hadn't explored, a hallway ending in what looked like a normal linen closet. He pressed his palm against a hidden panel, and the back wall slid open with a mechanical hiss, revealing a reinforced steel door. My stomach dropped. Jesus Christ. "Standard precaution," Antonio said, entering a code on a keypad. The door opened into a room maybe 12 feet square, with concrete walls, a bank of monitors showing different angles of the property, emergency supplies stacked on metal shelves, and a small sofa with blankets. This wasn't standard anything. This was the kind of safe room people had when serious threats were part of their everyday reality. "Papa?" Marco's voice trembled, picking up on my fear. "Your papa is making sure everything stays safe," I said, trying to keep my voice calm even as my mind raced. "We're going to wait here for a little bit, okay? Like a special fort." Antonio showed me how to lock the door from inside, pointed out the supplies: water, food, first aid kit, communication equipment. "Mister, Costello will come for you when it's clear. Don't open this door for anyone else." Then he was gone, and I was alone with Marco in a panic room, watching security feeds that showed armed men taking positions around the property. "Emma?" Marco pressed against my side. "Scared." "No, baby. Me too." I pulled him onto my lap, wrapping us both in a blanket even though the room wasn't cold. "But your papa is very good at keeping you safe. So we're going to sit here and maybe I'll tell you a story. Would you like that?" He nodded against my chest, and I launched into an elaborate fairy tale about a brave prince and his magical garden, watching the monitors over his head while my heart hammered. On the screens, I saw 3 black SUVs pull up to the gate. Men emerged, 5, 6, 7 of them, all armed. Gabriel met them in the driveway, flanked by Antonio, and 2 others I recognized as regular security. The confrontation looked tense, aggressive even, but no weapons were drawn. They talked for nearly 20 minutes while I held Marco and tried not to let him see how terrified I was. Finally, the visitors got back in their vehicles and left. Gabriel stood watching until they were gone, his posture radiating violence barely contained. Another 10 minutes passed, before the intercom crackled to life. "Emma, it's Gabriel. It's safe now. I'm coming to get you." I waited until I saw him on the monitors, walking toward the house alone, before I unlocked the door. He appeared moments later, looking exhausted and furious in equal measure. "What the hell was that?" I demanded, keeping my voice low so Marco wouldn't pick up on my anger. "A business disagreement that got heated. It's handled now." He reached for Marco, but I stepped back. Don't give me vague corporate speak when we just spent half an hour in a literal panic room watching armed men on your property." My voice shook. "I deserve the truth, Gabriel. What kind of business requires this level of security? What did I actually agree to when I came here?" His jaw clenched. "Not here. Not in front of Marco." "Fine. Then you put your son to bed tonight, and we have a conversation. A real one, with real answers." I finally let him take Marco, who'd started reaching for his father. No more evasions. Agreed. Something flickered in his expression. Respect, maybe, or resignation. "I'll explain everything. You deserve that." The rest of the evening was tense. Dinner was quiet, Marco subdued from the afternoon's disruption. Gabriel and I barely spoke except to coordinate Marco's bedtime routine. When the boy was finally asleep after 3 repetitions of Stella Stellina and extended cuddling, Gabriel found me in my room, where I'd been pacing, working up courage for this confrontation. "My office," he said simply, more comfortable than talking in doorways. I followed him downstairs to the room I'd only glimpsed in passing. It was masculine and elegant dark wood furniture, leather chairs, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves. But what caught my attention was the map on one wall, marked with colored pins and notations I couldn't decipher. Gabriel poured 2 glasses of whiskey from a crystal decanter, handed me one without asking if I wanted it. I took a sip for courage, the burn steadying my nerves. "The men who came today," he began without preamble, "represent a rival organization. They believe I've encroached on territory they consider theirs. The meeting was to clarify boundaries and avoid further conflict. Rival organization, I repeated. You mean like competing businesses? I mean like competing families. He met my eyes directly. Emma, my family has been involved in organized crime for 3 generations. Import operations that aren't always legal, protection services for businesses that prefer to avoid official channels, management of certain enterprises that exist outside conventional regulation. The words hung between us, impossible to unhear. Organized crime. He'd just admitted to being part of the Mafia, as casually as someone might admit to working in insurance. You're telling me you're a criminal. My voice came out flat, emotionless, while my brain scrambled to process this confirmation of what I'd suspected but refused to fully acknowledge. I'm telling you, I inherited a legacy I didn't choose but have tried to manage responsibly. I don't deal in drugs, don't exploit women, don't prey on the vulnerable. My family's operations focus on providing services people want access to without government interference. He took a long drink. But yes, by legal definition, much of what I do is criminal activity. And those men today? They were threatening you? Marco? They were posturing, testing to see if I'd fold under pressure. I made it clear I wouldn't. His expression hardened. And I made it even clearer that my son is completely off limits. Any organization that targets children becomes an enemy of every family on the East Coast. They understood the message. I sank into one of the leather chairs, legs suddenly unsteady. I'm living in a crime boss's house, taking care of a mafia heir. That's what this is. You're taking care of a little boy who lost his mother and desperately needs help healing. That's what... This is Emma. Everything else is context. Gabriel sat across from me, leaning forward intently. I won't lie to you anymore. You deserve honesty. But Marco's trauma, his grief, his need for you, that's all completely genuine. I didn't fabricate his pain to manipulate you into being here. No, you just conveniently left out that being here might put me in danger from your rivals. You're safer here than anywhere else in the city. This property is a fortress. My security is the best money can buy. And after today's meeting, every organization in the region knows that anyone connected to me is protected by the full weight of my family's resources. He paused. Including you. I didn't ask to be protected by the Mafia, but you asked to help my son. Unfortunately, those things are inseparable. His voice softened. I understand if you want to leave. I'll pay you for the full 3 months regardless. I'll provide security for your apartment until I'm certain no one views you as a potential target. You can walk away tonight with no penalties. Leave. Go back to my tiny apartment in Dorchester, to ER shifts and student loan debt, and a life that was predictable and safe and utterly separate from organized crime. Go back to not seeing Marco every morning, not hearing his laugh, not watching him slowly heal from his mother's death. Go back to not seeing Gabriel's rare smiles, not having these conversations that felt more real than anything I'd experienced in years. If I stay, I said slowly, I need complete honesty from now on. No more vague euphemisms about business interests. I don't need to know operational details, but I need to know when there's danger, when to be careful, when Marco might be at risk. Hope flickered in Gabriel's dark eyes. You're considering staying? I made a promise to a 4-year-old that I wouldn't leave without saying goodbye. I keep my promises. I finished my whiskey, welcoming the burn. And maybe I'm more comfortable with moral ambiguity than I thought. My entire childhood was spent in a gray area my grandmother worked off the books. We survived on cash assistance she wasn't technically eligible for. I learned early that rules were flexible when survival was at stake. You're not like me, Emma. Don't convince yourself otherwise. Maybe not, but I'm also not naive enough to believe the world is divided into clean good and evil anymore. I stood, suddenly exhausted. I'm staying, Gabriel. For Marco, but we're establishing new boundaries. I want to know the truth about your world, even if I'm not participating in it directly. He stood as well, closing the distance between us until I could smell his cologne, see the gold flecks in his dark eyes. Thank you. For staying, for understanding, for not running when most people would. Don't thank me yet. You might regret this level of honesty. I moved toward the door, needing space before I did something stupid like lean into his warmth. I'm going to bed. Tomorrow we figure out how to explain security protocols to a 4-year-old without traumatizing him further. Emma. His voice stopped me at the doorway. For what it's worth, I'm sorry. For not being honest from the beginning, for putting you in this position, you deserved better. Yeah, I did, but we work with what we have. I looked back at him. This man who was simultaneously a devoted father and a criminal, who'd lied to me and yet somehow given me purpose. Good night, Gabriel. Good night, Emma. I climbed the stairs to my room, mind churning with everything I'd learned. I should have been terrified, should have been packing my bags and calling a cab. Instead, I felt strangely calm, like pieces of a puzzle I hadn't known I was solving had finally clicked into place. This wasn't a normal life. It wasn't safe or simple or anything I'd imagined for myself, but it was real. And after years of just surviving, of going through motions without feeling truly alive, real was intoxicating. I fell asleep thinking about Marco's laughter and Gabriel's rare smiles, and the way I'd somehow stumbled into a world where love and danger were two sides of the same coin. The next 3 weeks were strange, intensely domestic, while simultaneously existing in the shadow of Gabriel's revealed criminal enterprise. He kept his promise about honesty, explaining security protocols in clinical detail. The guards rotated on 8-hour shifts, 4 men always on property. Certain rooms had panic buttons. The entire estate was monitored by cameras linked to a central security hub in the city, where Gabriel's organization coordinated operations. Operations meant things I tried not to think about too carefully: protection rackets, underground gambling, smuggling operations that brought in luxury goods without import taxes. Gabriel described it matter-of-factly, and I listened with the same professional detachment I'd used in the ER when gang members came in with bullet wounds. Not my world, not my judgment to make, but understanding the context changed how I saw everything. The expensive suits were armor, projecting power. The careful language was operational security. Even the way Gabriel moved, always aware of his surroundings, constantly assessing threats, was training from a world where letting your guard down could get you killed, and Marco was being raised in this. Born into a legacy of violence and power that he'd inherit whether he wanted it or not. The thought kept me awake at night. Does he know? I asked Gabriel one evening after Marco was in bed. We'd fallen into a routine of these late-night conversations, ostensibly about Marco's care but increasingly personal. Does Marco understand what you do? He knows I work with family businesses, that sometimes people are angry with Papa, that we have guards to keep us safe. Gabriel swirled whiskey in his glass, staring at the amber liquid. When he's older, I'll explain more. Give him context for his inheritance. What if he doesn't want it? What if he wants a different life? Then I'll support that choice. Protect him while he builds something else. He looked up, his expression fierce. I won't force this world on him the way it was forced on me. My father died when I was 23. My older brother had been killed 2 years before that. Suddenly I was head of the family with no preparation, no choice. I've spent 13 years building something stable enough that Marco won't face the same violence I did. Is that possible? Building stability in organized crime? I don't know, but I'm trying. He set down his glass. Rachel wanted me to go legitimate, to transition the family businesses into something legal. We were working on it when she died. Import operations that actually imported legal goods, real estate investments, restaurants that didn't launder money. She had a 5-year plan. What happened to the plan? It's still happening, just slower. After she died, I had to focus on keeping Marco alive and functional. The business transitions took a back seat. He paused, something vulnerable crossing his face. But lately, with you here, I've been thinking about it again, about what future I'm building for my son. The implication hung between us that my presence had somehow rekindled his desire for change, that I represented possibility beyond survival. Gabriel. I started, not sure what I wanted to say. He stood abruptly. It's late. You should get some rest. The dismissal was clear, and I took it, confused by the sudden retreat. We'd been growing closer, building something that felt like friendship with undercurrents of attraction neither of us acknowledged. Then randomly he'd pull back, create distance, remind me that I was an employee here for a specific purpose. It was maddening. It was probably smart. It made me want him more. The kiss happened on day 37. Marco had been having a good week sleeping through the night, eating well, his laughter coming more easily. We'd established routines that worked, created stability that let him relax into childhood instead of constantly bracing for disaster. That afternoon, the 3 of us were in the living room. Marco played with building blocks while Gabriel read through business documents, and I worked on sketches for a children's book. I'd started writing a story about a little boy learning to be brave after losing someone. Important. It was peaceful, domestic, the kind of moment that felt suspended in amber, perfect and fragile. Papa, Marco called. Emma, look. We both looked up to find he'd built an elaborate tower, blocks stacked precariously but holding steady. His face shone with pride. "That's amazing, sweetheart." I moved to admire his work, and Gabriel joined us, crouching beside his son. "You did this all yourself?" Gabriel asked, genuine wonder in his voice. "All myself, I'm strong like Papa." Marco flexed his small arms, making us both laugh. The moment was simple, easy, and looking at Gabriel's face so full of love for his son, I felt something shift in my chest. This wasn't just about Marco anymore. Somewhere along the way, I'd fallen for both of them. The child and the man, the grief and the hope, the whole complicated mess. Gabriel's eyes met mine over Marco's head, and whatever he saw in my expression made his breath catch. Time seemed to slow, stretch, hold us in its grip. "Marco, why don't you show Emma your room?" Gabriel said, his voice slightly rough. "The new books I bought you came today." "Okay." Marco grabbed my hand, pulling me toward the stairs, chattering about superheroes and dinosaurs. I let him lead me, hyper-aware of Gabriel's gaze following us. In Marco's room, I helped him arrange the new books on his shelf, half listening to his commentary while my mind stayed downstairs with his father. When Marco got distracted playing with action figures, I slipped back out, intending to grab water from the kitchen. Instead, I found Gabriel in the hallway, looking like he'd been waiting. Emma, just my name, but loaded with meaning. "Gabriel?" I stopped a few feet away, suddenly nervous. "We need to talk about this, about what's happening between us." He moved closer, and I caught that familiar scent of his cologne. "I hired you to help my son. Somewhere along the way, this became something else." "I know. It's inappropriate. You're my employee. I'm your boss. The power dynamic makes anything between us complicated at best, coercive at worst." He was reciting reasons, logical arguments against what we both felt. "I know that too, but I can't stop thinking about you. Can't stop noticing the way you smile at Marco, the sound of your laugh, how you look in the morning with your hair messy and your eyes still half asleep." His voice dropped lower. "Can't stop wanting to kiss you to see if you taste as good as I imagine." My breath caught. "Gabriel, tell me to stop. Tell me this is crossing a line and I'll back away, maintain professional distance. I'll respect whatever boundaries you set." He was close enough now that I could see his pulse hammering in his throat. "But Emma, if you feel even a fraction of what I'm feeling, I need to know. Because this is driving me insane." I should have told him to stop. Should have maintained those professional boundaries. Protected myself from the inevitable heartbreak of falling for a man whose life was built on violence and secrets. Instead, I closed the distance between us and kissed him. His response was immediate and consuming. Hands tangling in my hair, pulling me flush against him, kissing me like he'd been starving for this contact. I gripped his shirt, holding on as the world tilted sideways. When we finally broke apart, both breathing hard, his forehead pressed against mine. "This is a terrible idea," he whispered. "Probably the worst," I agreed. "I'm still technically your employer. And I'm still technically just here for Marco. Technically." He kissed me again, softer this time. "We need rules, boundaries. We can't let this impact our care for Marco or create instability for him." "Agreed. He comes first, always." I pulled back enough to meet his eyes. "But Gabriel, I don't want to pretend I don't feel this. Don't want to keep dancing around it. Neither do I." He cupped my face with devastating gentleness. "So we figure it out, carefully, slowly, without disrupting Marco's progress. Deal." We heard Marco's footsteps on the stairs and separated quickly, creating appropriate distance. But something had fundamentally shifted. The unspoken thing between us was spoken now, acknowledged and alive. That night, after Marco was asleep, Gabriel came to my room. We sat on my bed, fully clothed, just talking like we had been for weeks. But now we could lean into each other, his arm around my shoulders, my head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat while he told me about Rachel. "She'd like you," he said softly. "She always said I needed someone who wouldn't be intimidated by me, who'd push back when I was being an idiot. You do that. I'm not trying to replace her. I know. You couldn't if you tried. You're entirely yourself, and that's what I..." He paused, then finished quietly. "That's what I'm falling for." I tilted my head up to look at him. "This is complicated. Everything in my life is complicated." He kissed my forehead. "At least this is the good kind." We fell asleep like that, wrapped around each other, fully clothed, Technically inappropriate, but feeling more right than anything in my life had in years. The complications would come later, they always did in Gabriel's world. But for that moment, I let myself believe that love could exist in the gray areas, that two broken people could build something real from chaos and loss, that sometimes the most dangerous choice was also the most worthwhile. The attack came 6 days later. I woke to the sound of breaking glass and Marco's screams. My body moved on pure instinct, racing down the hallway toward his room even as every rational thought screamed that I should be running the other direction. Gabriel was already there, pulling Marco from his bed, shielding the boy's body with his own. The window was shattered, glass scattered across the floor. Through the broken frame, I could see flames on the ground, something burning, creating chaos and distraction. Safe room, now. Gabriel's voice was pure command, the gentle father replaced by something harder, more dangerous. We ran. Antonio appeared from somewhere, weapon drawn, joining 2 other guards who materialized like ghosts. They formed a protective triangle around us as we moved through the house toward the panic room. Behind us, I heard the front door crash open, shouting in a language I didn't recognize. More breaking glass. Gabriel shoved me and Marco through the panic room door, but didn't follow. Gabriel! I grabbed his arm, refusing to let go. I have to handle this. Lock the door. Don't open it for anyone but me. He kissed me hard, desperately. Keep my son safe. Emma, please. Then he was gone, Antonio sealing the door between us. I locked it with shaking hands, scooped Marco into my arms, and sank onto the sofa. The boy was hysterical, screaming for his father, terrified in ways that transcended this immediate danger. Papa will come back, I promised, rocking him frantically. He'll come back. He always comes back. Please, God, let that be true. On the monitors, I watched hell unfold. The attackers, maybe 8 or 9 of them, had breached the property, but were being systematically pushed back by Gabriel's security. Gunfire lit up the darkness. Bodies fell on both sides, and Gabriel was in the middle of it, weapon in hand, moving with lethal precision that made him unrecognizable from the gentle father who read bedtime stories. This was who he really was. This was the world he lived in, the violence he'd tried to shield me from. The battle lasted maybe 15 minutes, though it felt like hours. When the shooting finally stopped, I counted bodies on the grounds, 4 intruders down, 2 of Gabriel's men injured but moving. Then silence, terrifying and absolute. I waited, holding Marco, singing Stella Stellina through tears while he sobbed against my chest. 5 minutes, 10, 15. Finally, the intercom crackled. Emma, it's Gabriel. We're clear. I'm coming for you. I didn't move until I saw him on the monitors, covered in blood that might or might not be his own, but alive. Walking toward the safe room, alive. When the door opened, Marco lunged from my arms to his father's. Gabriel caught him, holding him tight despite obvious pain. His left arm was bleeding, a gash that would need stitches. You're hurt, I said, my nurse training kicking in automatically. It's nothing. He looked at me with exhausted eyes. Are you okay? Both of you? Terrified but unharmed. I touched his face gently, needing to confirm he was real. Who were they? The same organization from a few weeks ago. They decided to escalate instead of backing down. His jaw clenched. They made a very bad choice. The cleanup took hours. Police came on Gabriel's payroll, I realized, when they accepted his explanation about a home invasion without asking difficult questions. Paramedics treated the injured. Bodies were removed with efficiency that spoke of practice. I stayed with Marco, keeping him away from the worst of it, singing and soothing and trying to help him process trauma that no 4-year-old should experience. By dawn, the property looked almost normal, except for the broken windows and scorched grass where the fire had burned. Gabriel had disappeared into his office with his senior people, dealing with fallout I couldn't imagine. I found him there at noon, still in his blood-stained clothes, staring at nothing. Marco's napping, I said softly from the doorway. Finally exhausted himself. Good, that's good. He didn't look at me. Emma, I need you to leave. The words hit like a physical blow. What? This isn't safe for you. Last night proved that. My enemies are willing to attack my home, to put my family at risk. I can't ask you to stay in this danger. His voice was flat, emotionless. I'll pay you for the full contract period. Antonio will drive you home today. I'll maintain security on your apartment for 6 months to ensure no one targets you. You're firing me. The betrayal cut deep. After everything, After last night, I'm protecting you. There's a difference. He finally met my eyes, and the pain in them nearly broke me. You deserve a safe, normal life. Not this. Not watching people die on my property while hiding in a panic room. I care about you too much to keep you in this world. That's not your choice to make, Gabriel. It's the only choice I can make. Please don't fight me on this. I can't lose you, the way I lost Rachel. His voice cracked. I can't watch another person I love die because they were connected to me. Love. He'd said it, and in the same breath was pushing me away. What about Marco? You're going to tell a traumatized 4-year-old that another important person in his life is disappearing? Guilt flashed across his face. I'll help him understand. We'll find another therapist, someone who can help him from a distance. Someone who doesn't live here, doesn't love him. I moved closer, fury and heartbreak warring in my chest. You're so busy protecting everyone that you're destroying us in the process. Better destroyed than dead. We stared at each other across the destroyed office. Two people who'd found something real in the worst possible circumstances. Now watching it crumble under the weight of violence neither of us could control. Fine, I said finally. I'll leave. But I'm telling Marco goodbye properly. And you're going to let him grieve this loss instead of pretending it's better this way. Emma, no. You don't get to make this easy on yourself. You don't get to pretend you're doing this for noble reasons when you're really just terrified. I headed for the door. I'll be packed by dinner. But I'm saying goodbye to Marco first, and you're going to watch what your fear costs him. I walked out before he could respond, before the tears could fall, before I could beg him to reconsider. In my room, I threw clothes into suitcases through blurry vision. 3 months had become 6 weeks. 6 weeks that had somehow changed everything. I'd fallen in love with a little boy who'd needed someone to understand his grief. I'd fallen in love with his father who carried his own pain with quiet desperation. And now I was leaving both of them because the world Gabriel lived in didn't allow for happiness that wasn't shadowed by death. The knock on my door was soft, Marco's voice even softer. Emma, why you packing? We going somewhere? I turned to find him standing in the doorway, his favorite stuffed rabbit clutched to his chest, his dark eyes wide with growing fear. And I knew I couldn't do this. Couldn't leave him. Couldn't let Gabriel's fear win. Come here, sweetheart. I gathered him into my arms, made a decision that was probably insane but felt absolutely right. I need to talk to your papa about something. Can you be brave for me? Okay, he whispered against my shoulder. I carried him downstairs to Gabriel's office, pushed open the door without knocking. Gabriel looked up, surprise flickering across his face. I'm not leaving, I announced. I'm staying and you don't get a vote. Emma, we already discussed. No, you dictated. Now I'm choosing. I set Marco down but kept my hand on his shoulder. I'm staying because this child needs me, because I made him a promise not to disappear, and I keep my promises, because I love him more than I fear your world. It's not safe. Life isn't safe. My parents died in a car. Accident. My grandmother had a heart attack in her sleep. Safety is an illusion we tell ourselves to feel in control. I moved closer to his desk. But love is real. Connection is real. And I'll be damned if I let violence and fear destroy what we're building here. You could die. So could you. So could Marco. Any of us could die tomorrow from 1,000 different causes. I met his eyes directly. But at least if I stay, we get today. And tomorrow. And every day until the universe decides otherwise. Gabriel stood slowly, moving around his desk to stand in front of me. You're the bravest person I've ever met. Or the most foolish. Probably both. I took his hand. But I'm staying, Gabriel. Unless you physically drag me out of here, I'm staying. He looked down at Marco, who'd moved to grip both our hands, literally connecting us. His son's face was hopeful, desperate, pleading without words. If you stay, it's with full knowledge of the risks. Full understanding that my enemies might target you. Gabriel's voice was rough. I can't promise to keep you safe, Emma. I can only promise to try. That's all any of us can do. I squeezed his hand. So are we done with this martyrdom bullshit? Can we focus on actually living instead of just surviving? A smile tugged at his mouth, the first genuine expression I'd seen from him since the attack. When did you get so tough? Around the time I fell in love with a Mafia boss and his son. I kissed him gently, aware of Marco watching with interest. Besides, someone has to keep you from making catastrophically stupid decisions. I love you too, he whispered against my lips. God help me, I love you too. Papa? Marco tugged on our joined hands. Emma staying? Yes, Piccolo. Gabriel lifted his son, keeping one arm around me. Emma's staying. Good. Marco wrapped his arms around both our necks, connecting us in a three-way hug that felt like coming home. Love Emma. Love Papa. We family now. Out of the mouths of children came the simplest truth. Somehow, impossibly, we'd become a family. Not through traditional means, not through safety or simplicity, but through shared grief and desperate hope, and the courage to choose love even when terror seemed like the wiser option. It wouldn't be easy. Gabriel's world would keep testing us, keep threatening what we'd built. But standing there in his office with Marco between us and our future uncertain but ours, I knew I'd made the right choice. Sometimes the bravest thing you could do was stay, was fight for love even when leaving would be simpler, was build something real from broken pieces and refuse to let violence have the final word. Family, I agreed, kissing Marco's forehead and then Gabriel's cheek. For better or worse, we're family now. And I meant it with every fractured, hopeful piece of my heart. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you loved this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.